Hello, everybody. Welcome. Welcome to our live stream tonight. Get started here in just a moment. Let folks trickle in. Thank you for joining. This is Trump's Polluter Playground. This is a fascinating report by Public Citizen, Revolving Door Project, and we're super excited for our program tonight. My name is Roddy Hughes. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm based here in the high desert of New Mexico. I'm an organizing strategist for the Sierra Club's Beyond Dirty Fuels campaign. Our small but mighty team is fighting the fossil fuel industry so that we can keep oil and gas in the ground where it belongs. Before we get into the program, I wanted to congratulate everybody in New York, Virginia, New Jersey, California, and beyond for the huge electoral victories last week. We've shown how much we value our democracy and that we can stand up together and we can take back our government and our democracy from the billionaires and their politicians. But we have to keep up this momentum. We have a lot of work to do. Our work is to keep organizing, taking back our community spaces. Our work is to keep calling out injustices and fighting for the rights of everyone, especially those being targeted by ICE. Our work is to replace fear and division by centering our values of acceptance and love. Our work is to advocate for affordable health care, economic justice, and a stable climate, and to stop the abuses of the billionaires and their corporate greed. If you're tuning into this live stream, you're probably already an action taker and working to make change in your community. Our goal in hosting these events is to provide you with information and analysis to support your work and your advocacy in your community. The MAGA folks ran on draining the swamp and then immediately filled the administration with industry insiders who are now using our government to make themselves and their shareholders even richer. Our friends at Public Citizen, the Revolving Door Project, have done some amazing work on this report, Trump's Polluter Playground. And our hope is that you'll take their findings back to your conversations, the conversations you're having with your friends and your families, and to the debates you're having with elected officials and people running for office next year. Democrats won on affordability last week, and that's probably the right message for next year. But the fossil fuel industry spent $450 million to get Trump and the Republicans elected. That's just the money that we can see. There's dark money too. And they're getting what they paid for. We'll support candidates with strong affordability agendas, but we have to make sure that we also are strong champions for the climate, for environmental justice, and the energy transition. So here's our agenda tonight. Before we dive into the details of the report and how you can take action, we're going to hear from folks in Wisconsin about the Line 5 fight. It's a massive pipeline. The Trump administration's Army Corps of Engineers just issued new permits a couple of weeks ago in a crazy example of the administration's white glove concierge service for the fossil fuel industry. Then we're going to turn it over to Tony and Alan to present their findings in their report. And then Claire from the Sierra Club will talk you through an action you can take to stop Trump's madness. I invite you to share this report and this action with your friends, family, and neighbors, and to invite them into our movement. Our format tonight is a live stream instead of a Zoom webinar, but we still want your questions. We're monitoring the comment sections in each of the platforms, so please drop your questions in that comment section, and we'll keep track of them and go through them at the end. So let's get into it. Our first speaker tonight is Jadine Sonada from the Sierra Club's Wisconsin chapter. Jadine is unable to be here live tonight, but recorded an update for us this morning on the Line 5 project. And so we'll play that for you now. It's kind of a crazy example from just a couple weeks ago. So let's bring in Jadine. So thank you.
In Wisconsin, and I'm here today to tell you a little bit about how the Trump administration has been impacting an issue that I work closely on, and that is Enbridge's Line 5 pipeline. Line 5 is a tar sands oil pipeline that runs across the Great Lakes, stretching from northern Wisconsin through the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, and then down through Michigan. It largely transports oil from Canada back to Canada, and it has been operating for decades past its engineered lifespan. So every day that it continues to operate, it is a threat to the Great Lakes. It's a threat to climate as the climate crisis intensifies, and it threatens tribal sovereignty and treaty rights. And so the Wisconsin chapter, with the Michigan chapter, several other Sierra Club chapters, the Dirty Fuels Campaign, and Sierra Club Canada have all been working together on the around the issue of shutting down Line 5 for several years, more than several years actually. But anyway, I'm here to talk a little bit today about how changes in the Trump administration have really impacted this this campaign and the work that we're doing. And so I'll start with just like a short backgrounder on what Line 5 is in case folks are not familiar with it. It is a complicated issue, but I'll try and do my best to be brief. And there's plenty more information online if you're interested in learning more of the details. I'll try and put up a map here. But Line 5 stretches, as I said, across Wisconsin and Michigan. And it is operating illegally on the Bad River Reservation in Wisconsin and in the Straits of Mackinac in Michigan. I'm going to focus on the Bad River Reservation because that's the work that I am most closely engaged in. And in order to get around the shutdown order for illegal operation, Enbridge has proposed rerouting Line 5 around the Bad River Reservation. This is a huge deal. It's really concerning because Enbridge has a terrible track record when it comes to pipeline construction, and it would put the entire reservation at risk. There are countless water bodies that are crossed by the proposed route that Enbridge has proposed, and there is a lot of worry that they could damage aquifers, release drilling fluids, and so much more with what they've proposed. And so Bad River has been opposed to this project. Many environmental groups and others have been opposed to this project for years and have been pushing back on it while supporting Bad River's efforts to remove Line 5 from its reservation. There's a current shutdown order for June of 2026, which is really encouraging. And Enbridge has been pushing really, really hard to make sure that this reroute gets built before then, to continue Line 5's operation. And so when it comes to changes with the Trump administration and federal permitting, there's a federal permit that is required for Enbridge to build this reroute. Obviously, we don't want to see that. And with this administration, excuse me, we saw this permit granted at the end of October. This is really discouraging because federal law is really clear that the Army Corps can't approve federal permits for this project without final certification from the relevant state authority, and that is the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. About a year ago, the DNR did grant permits for the proposed reroute, but they were quickly challenged by the Bad River Band as well as environmental groups, including Sierra Club. And that challenge is still ongoing. There has been no decision made yet, and that makes the federal permits that the Army Corps granted illegal, premature, and unlawful. And we see this as part of a larger pattern and effort by the Trump administration. In early 2025, so earlier this year, President Trump declared an energy emergency, and in doing so, aimed to fast track several different fossil fuel projects through federal permitting with the Army Corps of Engineers. And that's what we have seen with Line 5 and the proposed reroute, just as I mentioned, late October. So this is really discouraging to see. It's really disappointing, and is something that we are encouraging local leaders to push back on. Of course, we're still continuing with our work to organize and are continuing to pursue the state level challenge to reroute permits as organizing is happening. And so we definitely encourage people to learn more and get involved. You can call Wisconsin's Governor Tony Evers. You can call Michigan's Governor Gretchen Whitmer. Both of them can speak out against these projects. And we have been building and organizing with many, many different people from throughout the region and really across the country. But this acts as a good example of how federal changes, the energy emergency and permitting fast tracking is impacting really important local campaigns that have wide-reaching impacts across the country. So I know I can't be there in person today, but thanks for listening to a little bit about what is going on with the work to shut down Line 5. I'm always happy to chat more if people have questions in the future, and there's plenty of information online. So thanks for being here, and hopefully talk to you all sometime soon.
So grateful for Jadine putting together that video and a really good presentation. I see the question in the comments about sharing the map again. Sadly, that was a recording, so I can't just rewind and pull that up, but we will make that available to you for sure. Sorry about that. But this Line 5 is just an infuriating example of what happens when you put industry in charge of our regulatory agencies. And to dig more into that, and sadly, our speakers probably have a lot more examples that they've been looking at. But our speakers tonight are Tony, a senior researcher from the Revolving Door Project, who focuses on state oversight, Clean Air Act, fossil fuel, front groups and corporate influence, and so much more. And Alan from the Public Citizen, who focuses on energy and environmental issues. His research has targeted corporate influence and conflicts of interest in the Trump administration, which has probably kept him pretty busy over the last few years. So anyway, Tony and Alan, welcome, and please tell us about Trump's Polluter Playground.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for that introduction and also for having me. Yeah, just to quickly provide some background for this report, there's just been an insane amount of information and policy changes and just really bad things that we've seen implemented by this admin over the past year. And I think something that I've noticed is that in trying to keep up with all of that and trying to keep up with the latest news of the day, it seems like some of the broader backgrounding has ultimately gotten kind of lost. And specifically the fact that it is not just this amorphous, massive entity that is the entirety of the federal executive branch that is doing all of these bad things all of the time, but rather it's also specific people that are entering government with specific conflicts of interest, whom may have more personal incentive to serve the specific priorities of their previous and oftentimes future employers, rather than protect the interest of the public writ large. And the public deserves to know what corporate interests are being gifted greater seat at that decision-making table as a result of that. And so what we really hoped for with this project was to help fill that gap and to really try to make the networks of these like polluting power brokers that exist across the staffing of this administration more accessible and more transparent for the general public, which it already should have been. But Hillary, if you could hit the next slide. Thank you. As y'all can see, what we ultimately found over the course of that project is that there are more than 110 people throughout the Trump administration who have some kind of tie to polluting interests. And next slide. The highest number of those are at the Department of the Interior, followed by the DOE, followed by the EPA. And then, of course, there are others. But also, next slide, sorry, that's a lot all at once. But to get into a few of the like actual revolver profiles themselves, we wanted to start with the cabinet. And so just to start, is the U.S. Secretary of Energy, Chris Wright. Wright is the co-founder / former CEO of the fracking company Liberty Energy. And in his time already at DOE, Wright has spent a lot of effort playing pretend that he's the Trump administration's captain of coal instead of doing his actual job, which you can see encapsulated by the tweet on the slide. But even when Wright isn't doing that, he has spent a lot of time parroting misleading information about renewables, evangelizing U.S. fossil exports, and otherwise advocating for mass regulatory rollbacks, all of which fundamentally hurt American consumers and communities while also favoring the talking points of big oil. Or next slide. Take, for example, Brooke Rollins, who is the Secretary of the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Rollins comes to this job from years within the fossil-funded, climate-skeptic think tank sphere, including the now notorious America First Policy Institute, which she helped to found, but also the Texas Public Policy Foundation, which she ran for a decade, both of which are hard right influence shops and oil and gas cheerleading organizations that are backed by another oil and gas billionaire and also a Christian nationalist preacher whose name is Tim Dunn. Tim Dunn's individual reach within this administration is also sort of particularly insane, and can be encapsulated in the fact that Rollins isn't even the only cabinet member coming to the admin from the Dunn-backed think tank world. In fact, EPA Secretary Lee Zeldin, the Secretary of Education Linda McMahon, the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development Scott Turner, the U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi, and more all have some former association and title with AFPI. That paints an extremely concerning picture about the influence that a single person and a single corporation can have within this administration. And once again, calls into question the ways in which such far-reaching influence inherently degrades the primacy of the public interest in these public offices. And I've been talking for a minute, so I'll let Alan take it from here.
Thank you, Tony, and great to be here. Thank you to Sierra Club for having us. I'm Alan Zibel. As we said earlier, I'm a research director here at Public Citizen in Washington, D.C. We've been around for 50 years doing corporate accountability work and fighting the good fight. So just to add on to some of the stuff that Tony said, the cabinet secretaries have kind of redefined their roles in ways that really, sometimes have nothing to do with their actual job as we've traditionally thought of it. So Burgum, the Interior Secretary, the Trump administration created a White House group called the National Energy Dominance Council to kind of promote their agenda of quote unquote energy dominance. And Burgum is the chair of that. And Wright, I guess, serves on it, and a bunch of their staffers involved. So they just spent, Burgum and Wright spent a bunch of time while the federal government was shut down, actually in the United Arab Emirates and then Greece, acting as the nation's top liquefied natural gas salespeople, which I didn't realize it was a federal government function. And Burgum also did an AI kind of data center chip deal with the Emiratis, which last I checked was not part of the Interior Department's function. So they've really stretched and kind of stretched their roles to, very kind of different functions that's envisioned and really kind of, in Burgum's case, ignored our national parks and what he's actually supposed to be doing. I think we're supposed to be on the Fanatics wish list slide. I think we're supposed to be back one. So yeah, that one. Some of what they've done is similar to the first Trump administration, where they're doing a ton of rollbacks, regulatory rollbacks, and giveaways. So as you saw, but the difference that we've seen is they've been very, very fast, very organized, and very aggressive. In the first Trump administration was characterized by kind of some of the very similar people, and in some cases exactly the same people. Working at the EPA, there are a couple of retreads from Trump 1.0, but they've been much, much better at doing bad things. They've been very organized. Project 2025 gave them a whole detailed plan. They came in with a real game plan. So, unfortunately, at this point in the administration, they've done far more bad things. So they, one of the worst things they did was they revoked the endangerment finding. It's the legal finding brought by the Obama administration that characterized climate change as a danger to public health, public welfare. They processed a handful of LNG terminal approvals or LNG export authorizations from the Department of Energy. They've laid off a ton of people at the EPA. They've eliminated the Scientific Research Office. And these are a couple of examples of staffers in the Trump administration and their previous jobs. You see a guy from BP, a guy from AFPM, America Fuel and Petrochem Manufacturers, and API. There's someone from Marathon Petroleum. So that just goes to Tony's point from earlier that they are revolving into government and advocating, with interests that are either similar or exactly the same as their prior employers. So Tony, you were going to take public lands, is that right? Or do you want me to do public lands?
I can do it. I got it.
Okay, sure.
Yeah, thanks, Alan. Yeah, we also wanted to note that a huge part of what this administration has been up to is these pretty incredible threats to public lands. And Doug Burgum, who is the Secretary of Interior, as Alan was talking about, has historically spent the majority of his career in either tech or Republican politics, but also notably leases some of his own land for oil exploration to Continental Resources, which is a company run by the oil and gas billionaire and close Trump ally Harold Hamm. And notably also among the first moves that Burgum made as secretary was signing a series of secretarial orders aimed at increasing oil and gas as well as mining companies' access to public lands, while also sabotaging the renewable permitting process that goes through the Department of Interior. All while pretty thoroughly ignoring the needs and basic staffing requirements of our national parks and national monuments. To make matters worse on that, DOGE-related cuts at both Interior and also the U.S. Forest Service continue to be really devastating for actual public access to ostensibly public lands. Which is more than anything dangerous for visitors and vulnerable ecosystems who rely on these agencies' firefighting teams, lifeguards, weather watchers, biologists, and more to make sure that our parks are safe and that people are safe there. But of this administration is poised also to pretty fundamentally attack national monuments, including by attempting to overturn nearly 100 years of precedent via its challenge, or its apparent challenge of the Antiquities Act. And the folks who are helping implement all of this are folks like Karen Budd Phelan, who is a longtime anti-public lands activist and now the Associate Deputy Secretary of the Interior. Or you have folks like Bill Groffey, who is also at Interior, who is coming to the administration from the Colorado Oil and Gas Association. Or you have Lenora Pettit at the DOJ, who authored a report earlier this year on the Antiquities Act that found decided that presidents can unilaterally revoke national monument designations made by former presidents, which upsets, again, nearly 100 years of clear-cut precedent that is not true and never has been. Pettit for her, Pettit is an interesting character also because she's coming to the DOJ from Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton's office, who in turn has a really troubling relationship with Tim Dunn and the Texas Public Policy Foundation. Because all of these folks exist in the same ecosystem and are never that far away from each other. All that to say is all of these things do not need to be inevitable, and all of these things are being enacted by people with a really particular point of view and with a really particular purpose, oftentimes related to their previous employment. And that does, and we think that it is important for the general public to have access to that information such that they can then challenge the realities of this moment, which again, like, do not have to be how it is forever. Anyway, sorry, back to you, Alan.
Great, thank you, Tony. One more thing to add on that in terms of something that's happened just in the past few days after a report came out is that the administration nominated Steve Pierce, a former congressman from New Mexico, who is a longtime advocate of privatizing public lands and selling them off. So another disturbing that was after their first nominee, and this is to run the Bureau of Land Management. This is after their first nominee, Kathleen Sagama, withdrew her nomination over the spring because, and this is a funny one, or a funny, sad one, because it was discovered that she had been critical of Trump's response to January 6th. So she ended up getting in trouble with Trump for doing the right thing rather than the wrong thing, because that's what counts as a scandal in Trump world. Next slide, please. So one of the key differences between this Trump administration and the first one is they've been extremely aggressive about attacking renewables. And so Trump has never liked renewables. He's always said these kind of dumb things about wind turbine causing cancer, just kind of ridiculous things. But in the first administration, they were somewhat hostile to renewables, but not this hostile. And I think David Bernhardt, the second Interior Secretary, had I think he tied up and delayed some offshore wind, but he had also he's a lobbyist. He had some offshore wind clients, and so he always I think he's denied that he was trying to sabotage offshore wind, but these guys, make no bones about it. So they have revoked a series of permits for East Coast offshore wind farms off the coast of, and this is multiple agencies too, the EPA and Interior are the main ones, off of Cape Cod, Rhode Island. They tried to stop Maryland. They're fighting with Virginia. They were even fighting with the Republican governor of Virginia, Governor Youngkin, who is termed out. So it's been consistent and extremely aggressive, and even involved one of the wind farms was 80% complete. So they are taking a very aggressive legal stance. They'll probably, in my estimation, lose some of those cases, but so I would be worried if I were a wind farm developer who was just getting started. But I would think that the projects that are already under construction would have a good case against the administration. They also, and I believe Sierra Club's been working closely on this issue. I think they canceled $7 billion IRA, Inflation Reduction Act grant program for solar. It's just been sweeping and just much more aggressive than anybody anticipated. One interesting thing is like a lot of people, centrists, really kind of center right, center left people, said, "Oh, Doug Burgum, he was a moderate governor. He'll be fine. No big deal. He's kind of an all of the above energy guy." Just the exact opposite was the case. Like, he was, a relatively moderate governor and promoted, it wasn't a climate denier or anything, but, these guys, when they work for Trump, it's all about saluting the boss. So, and you can see here, we put in a just nutty quote from Trump. He really, we will not approve wind or farmer destroying solar. And and this is just a straight up lie that wind and solars are wind and solar are a driver of rising energy costs. That is not true. There's a new Lawrence Berkeley lab study that demonstrates that is not true, which is worth looking at. It's got a bunch of coverage in a bunch of media outlets. But yeah, in the report, we emphasize connections to a bunch of groups that fight against offshore wind. So offshore wind and solar. So the NOAA, National Oceanographic Administration, their general counsel, I believe, is Ann Hawkins, and she was the founder of a group called the Responsible Offshore Development Alliance, which is funded by commercial fishing industries. Maybe has some ties to oil and gas. We're not quite sure. I wouldn't be surprised if they did. But we couldn't document that. But they're a commercial fishing organization that fights against offshore wind farms. The Department of Energy's top renewable energy official is the founder or former executive at a fracking company, and she has no renewables experience. And then another key official is Matt Giaccona, who came from the National Ocean Industries Association, which is the offshore drilling association. He's been kind of the key guy revoking the permits for the Interior Department. And the interesting thing is he's very unusual. He's actually going up against his former trade group has offshore drillers and offshore wind, and they support both. But he is actually going against the interest of his former trade group in trying to block offshore wind. So let's do next slide. So I think just to wrap up, this little tidbit kind of really summed them up very well. So they have a group at the White House, as I said, called the National Energy Dominance Council, and one of their staffers is named Brittany Kelm, and she came. She had worked for a bunch of oil and gas companies and trade groups before going to the White House, and she did a podcast interview that was posted online that the Washington Post reported on. And she described their function well. So she says, we're like this little tiger team, concierge, white glove service, essentially. We were put together very particularly with the president's priorities mind in on energy. So keeping coal plants open, establishing critical mineral mining domestically, and then that broader supply chain. So basically, they've described this Energy Dominance Council as kind of like your one-stop shop. If you're a developer, pipeline developer, LNG terminal mining company, you go to them. They work with the necessary people, and they get your permits and expedite your approvals in the government. So So we are happy to take some questions, I guess, if people have got them, and thank you for your time.
We're going to do questions in a second. Right
Okay.
now, we are going to go to Claire Dorner. I just want to pause here for a
Oh,
second.
to Claire, I'm so sorry. Yes.
No, all good, all good.
I don't want to leave her, Claire.
I just want to pause here on this concierge service that oil and gas industry is getting for their permitting. It's just insane. I mean, I don't know. We've been working on this stuff for years and fighting permits and challenging permits, and it always seemed like an uphill slog. And all of a sudden, they need a concierge service. It's just really hard to fathom. So anyway, if you've been joining our live stream series, you've met Claire already. She is my colleague at the Sierra Club and works for our federal policy team behind the scenes on Capitol Hill, kind of pushing a lot of these issues. She's a great thought partner, and I love working with her. Claire, come on in.
Hey everyone, great to be here. Yeah, I'm on our federal policy team, typically covering liquefied methane gas exports and permitting reform, but here to talk about a really exciting movement that's happening. We've been hearing a lot of heavy stuff tonight, but there are things that we can do about it tonight and moving forward. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk about the Make Polluters Pay movement. I hope that some of you are familiar with this already, but this is basically a movement that's been countering heavy fossil fuel influence. And basically, Make Polluters Pay is a movement that's based off of the Truth campaign that went after big tobacco to try to expose all the misinformation that was keeping people sick at that time. And it's basically focused on making big oil accountable for their climate disinformation and the damage that they are doing to our communities and to our climate. And this is meant to be done through a number of different tactics, one of which being climate superfund bills. And the idea of a climate superfund bill is really simple. If you make a mess, you need to be the one to clean it up. And this whole concept with Make Polluters Pay is really universal. It's just that it isn't fair that big oil and gas companies are continuing to rake in record profits while we pay the price for pollution and lies, literally paying the price. And we need to make them pay for their damages. Next, please. So big oil has known about climate change for over 40 years. They've known since the 1970s that continuing to burn fossil fuels is going to lead to disaster. And that's what we're starting to see today. And they actively lied throughout the decades to try to maintain the status quo so that they could continue making their profits. So we've seen this through a number of different tactics over the years, from misinformation campaigns and greenwashing to labeling methane gas as natural gas or coining the term carbon footprint to blame the individual for the issue of climate change rather than the oil and gas industry. And we know that fossil fuel pollution is fueling extreme weather, deadly heat waves and fires and floods. Our lives are endangered all the time, and our ecosystems are becoming destabilized, which is threatening everything from our food system to the species that we really care about as well. And it's costing us billions of dollars per year to deal with this. So as I mentioned before, we are the ones paying the price for big oil's climate damages. People are losing their homes. People are not able to insure their homes anymore, depending on where they live. And cities and states are the ones that are spending the most, spending billions of dollars to respond to stop these climate disasters and extreme weather events. And the fossil fuel industry is making record profits, but they're also often being given tax breaks through the state and federal tax exemption programs that take this critical tax revenue away from communities. So you could have a community that got hit by a hurricane or is having a lot of cases of asthma or heart attacks because of the pollution that they live near, and they don't even have an operating hospital because they aren't able to have that tax revenue that instead is going towards the fossil fuel industry. Next slide, please. So what we've seen lately is that instead of providing support or acknowledging this. The Trump administration has been slashing critical relief programs like the National Weather Service and the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, and also doubling down on wanting to expand fossil fuel production and therefore fossil fuel pollution that is making these climate disasters much worse and continuing to increase costs for everyday people. I'll just quickly mention that for liquefied methane gas, the more that we export that gas to other countries, the higher domestic energy prices become for all of us at home across the country. Next slide, please. But there is a solution to this, and you all are really strongly encouraged to be a part of the solution. We can get communities the support that they need to manage these disasters and build a better, more resilient future by making polluters pay for the damages that they've done. And there are three main angles that we can take here: forcing polluters to pay for the full cost of the pollution, repealing subsidies, and reforming tax giveaways. Also adopting safeguards against industry pollution and risks to public health and communities, and also removing the power and influence of the industry and building a movement for change. Next slide, please. So how do we do this? Through climate superfund legislation, as I mentioned before, through many, many lawsuits against the industry over a series of years, which I know the Sierra Club and a lot of other organizations are actively involved in, and also through educational media campaigns and good old grassroots power, which is where my heart really is and where I really believe we have the potential to turn this all around. And these initiatives are modeled after federal environmental laws and establish a program to collect funds from the biggest polluting companies to help states pay for climate-related damages and adaptation measures. And one of the most important pieces of these kinds of programs is that the funds will be prioritized for projects that have been hit the hardest by fossil fuel production and climate change. So in some of the regions that I work in, for instance, Lake Charles, Louisiana, they have a lot of industry not only related to liquefied methane gas exports, but also a lot of other petrochemical industries and refineries. So communities like that need even more help than those that aren't sited near a lot of this infrastructure. These bills are gaining a lot of traction across multiple states and at the federal level. And this is kind of signaling a new era for what corporate accountability can look like in terms of addressing climate change. Next slide, please. So how do I know that we can win? Because I really do feel very excited about the Make Polluters Pay movement, and I think it's something that can go really far. Just look at the numbers. Vermont and New York have already passed two of the first ever climate superfund bills. Each of them are different, written to fit the needs and the challenges of the state. I, 2 years ago, was living in Vermont when the floods hit the area for the first year. I think it was 1,000-year floods that came through, and then the next year it came through and did it again. And these farmers that are struggling in Vermont need those funds to help rebuild and help support the food system, and polluters are the ones that should be paying for those types of remediation programs. Additionally, in more than 12 states, people are working on climate superfund legislation. So this is an idea that's expanding across the country. And in 46 different states or cities or municipalities, representing over a quarter of the US population, there are lawsuits against fossil fuel companies for fraud and climate damages. So this is very widespread, and it's moving really quickly. Next slide, please. Is the slide showing up fully? I want to make sure people can see the action. Let's see. Can folks see the action?
No, not really.
Huh. I see it listed correctly in our downloaded version. Just pausing here because I want to make sure you all can follow along with how you all can get involved.
That is very bizarre because it does look right in the slide deck.
Yeah, it's correct in the slide deck. Sorry about that. I don't know why that happened. But there's not a lot of text on this slide. Basically, oh, and Hillary, our lovely assistant for this whole presentation, she's the reason this all can happen, is putting the information in the chat. So be sure to take a look there. But we are asking you all to help us build outrage, build power, and build a united front, and basically telling Congress to act now to move forward as many climate superfund bills and actions to make polluters pay as possible. So we have an action alert that you can be a part of that Hillary will share the link to. There are also a few social media posts that you can share to have others take action. And so those are like the shorter term asks that you can do tonight. And the other things you can do to stay in touch are to join our mailing list, join Public Citizens mailing list and Revolving Door Project, and also to take a look at the Make Polluters Pay website, because they have their own information listed. And they have also really great graphics and coverage across the nation of where these climate lawsuits are taking place. You might be surprised to find one in your hometown taking place as well. That's all I've got. And thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you, Alan and Tony. What a great presentation. Make Polluters Pay is a really important campaign. And I encourage you all to take action tonight and share this with your networks, with your friends, your family, your neighbors. I think this is where we're going for the next year. So let's do some Q&A. We got some great comments, questions in the chat box. I'm not going to try to respond to all of them, but really good stuff. The first question was about Constitution states' rights clauses and the Supreme Court. I think that was in reference to the Line 5 argument. Sadly, we do not have any of the attorneys who are working on that. And not being a constitutional scholar myself, Alan, Tony, I don't know about you all, but I think we might punt on that one and try to get you an answer offline. Unless Alan, Tony, y'all want to take a cut at that? No. Okay. That is definitely a Line 5, different webinar, and we'll work on getting you information offline. So one of the questions that we got is, how can we protect our public lands from this administration, from the revolving door, from this kind of abuse in a future administration? So what are some protections we can put in place in the future to protect our public lands from this kind of abuse?
Sure. I mean, I would say that we had, elections matter. We had a very good Interior Secretary under President Biden. Secretary Holland was an excellent Interior Secretary who created a bunch of national monuments, protected a lot of lands, took a lot of steps to reform oil and gas leasing and bonding, which is, fits into the polluter pay theme, but bonding is basically ensuring that there's enough resources to make sure that oil and gas drillers pay to clean up their own well damage and well sites. There were good policies, and there was a lot of progress made under the Biden administration. Some of it's incremental, nerdy stuff, but important nonetheless. So I would just say that elections, have consequences. I'd also say another thing is, unfortunately, I mean, it's not really, we have, there was an era where there used to be some good Republicans on environmental issues, 15 years ago, and unfortunately the fossil fuel takeover of the Republican Party, funded by these fracking billionaires like Tim Dunn that Tony mentioned, has really driven their party to the extreme right and pushed out some of the more sensible voices that you used to have, which is just unfortunate.
I think also, just quickly building off that, is I think in some ways it's difficult to say in part because the administration has demonstrated such a thorough disregard for the basic rule of law. But in a real and somewhat boring way, like one of the best ways to sort of protect public lands in the future is like basic ethics reforms, and like sort of actually enforcing basic ethical standards and preventing policymakers from profiting off of public office now and in the future. And but yeah, sort of closing these ulterior motives and motivations that way. I think also within the Make Polluters Pay sort of framework, the public expression of outrage about what is being enacted upon our national parks and national monuments and US forests is huge. But so too is not falling for privatization schemes. And in some ways, what this administration seems poised to certainly try to do is try to convince the general public that public lands would be better off managed in private hands. Be that in the transformation of public lands into privately held resorts, or otherwise. There was a former National Park Service director wrote an article, and I think another former NPS official wrote an article for The Guardian at the beginning of the year, warning of basically like the Disneyfication of national park lands, that I would definitely recommend giving a read. But I think like one of the sort of best ways to protect public lands in the future is not fall sort of victim to the idea that they could be better off in private hands, which is just categorically in every sense of the word untrue. Yeah.
That's super helpful. Thank you. Really good. Claire, this one might be for you. Senator Whitehouse fights the administration on a lot of this work. What other representatives or senators are actively fighting him as well? Who are some of our allies?
There are a lot of really great ones. Too many for me to list all of them, but there's Representative Jayapal, there's Representative Omar, Representative Dingell. There are a lot. There's Representative Huffman and Senators Markey, Merkley, Sanders, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Representative Ocasio-Cortez, and lots and lots of others. So actually, when I came into this work, I didn't have experience on the Hill before, but I actually have felt very heartened since starting this work, feeling like there are more people in our Congress than I realized who are doing a lot of work that isn't often shown to fight back against these efforts. And so I just want to put that in people's minds that there's a lot of bad stuff that you hear about, but there's a lot of really great work that you don't hear about. And I'll also mention Representatives Caston and Levin, who are working on really incredible, exciting legislation for the Democratic Party to get people excited moving towards midterms. And it's specifically focused on lowering energy prices, building out affordable homes, things like that. So there's a lot of work moving, and it's always helpful for members of Congress to hear our support and to hear that we see the work that they're putting in. And I'll just say, even when it comes to the government reopening and any frustrations that are coming out of how folks are feeling related to not getting the guarantees on healthcare that the Democratic Party was hoping for. That was a minority of Democrats that, caved on the issue, and a lot of others were upset about how the government shutdown ended. And so there are a lot of people fighting against this, and we just need to show them that we are also actively engaged.
Yeah, Claire, I was actually going to make that point too, that it is, we often call our representatives and senators when we're really upset about something. But, we do need to show them some love too. When they're doing the right things on our issues, call them up and let them know. And we need to support them during these times. That was a really good question. Thank you. I'm going to ask this question. I'm not sure who can answer it. Will states be able to set their own emission standards for automobiles? The Trump administration has called California's more restrictive automobile emissions standards into question. They were created decades ago due to smog pollution in Los Angeles and elsewhere. Alan, Tony?
I can talk about that a little bit.
Great.
This administration certainly hopes that the answer is no. There's a series of ongoing litigation that's working its way through the federal courts. And it's still sort of up in the air where that will land, although the Supreme Court hasn't demonstrated a ton of empathy for the Clean Air Act writ large. And so, I mean, like the answer is right now, yes. In particular, California's exemption to the Clean Air Act, which allows it to set its own independent, stricter standards on auto emissions, is built into the Clean Air Act and is kind of indisputable, even though the administration and the CPA insists that it can unilaterally withdraw that essentially series of permissions. But there is a real danger to California and other states' abilities to adhere to those stricter admission standards in the future. And I wish I had a clearer answer, but as that question continues to move up through federal courts, the answer is we just don't know. Yeah, I don't know if anyone has anything else they want to add to that, though.
Alan? Claire? Cafe standards? No? Okay. Great. Thank you, Tony. Thank you for taking that. That was a good one. Before we go to the next question, Tony, Alan, it looks like folks want to get in touch with you. Be in touch. Do you mind sharing emails, or how do you want to do the contact stuff?
Sure.
Okay. Great.
Put that in the regular chat.
In the regular comments. If you're on a comment
Sure.
screen, that would be the best way to do that.
Will do.
Awesome. Thank you. I really like this question because I think it's a hard one, and kind of gets to how do we hold these companies and powerful rich people accountable. So Ben Moore wrote, obviously this is an evil takeover. Love that phrasing. Ben was a live-on ranger at Horn Island during the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. Making BP pay is one thing. Giving them control of the cleanup was a big mistake. The funds used in the cleanup weren't punitive enough. No one was fired. How do you punish a company as rich as the 13th richest country in the world? Alan, Tony, anything? How are we going to take down the evil empires?
With the power of the Sierra Club. I don't have a great answer to that one.
I mean, I think it goes back to this make polluters pay model. It is focused on accountability here. And the point is that we get the funds from the most polluting companies, but they don't dictate how those funds are utilized. The states and the municipalities dictate how those funds are utilized. And, you know, obviously big oil and gas companies don't want to have to pay for their pollution and their damages. They've never really had to pay the true cost of these damages. And honestly, it's impossible to even quantify the full true cost of what these damages look like. But this is something that will throw a wrench in the industry and will also help communities be more resilient at the same time. And I think as communities see what these positive benefits can look like and how this was being withheld from them for so long, for instance, you know, like what climate resiliency and affordable housing can look like, I think that will help build more opposition against the fossil fuel industry. So I think it's less so about punishing them because you know, they're probably an entity that can't be reformed into being a good actor in our communities. But this is a step towards the longer term goal of how we move away from fossil fuels, which we know we need to do.
Yeah, and
Excellent.
I would just say on a positive note, the renewables industry, despite all the bad policy coming from the U.S., the renewables industry and the EV industry are booming. I mean, around the world. I mean, there have been all these really encouraging headlines recently about solar taking off in Pakistan. I mean, in Africa, and the industry, particularly on the LNG issues that Claire and I have worked on. The industry was always arguing, oh, they need to go from coal to nat gas, and that would be the climate fix, is you'd go to gas. Well, it turns out that a lot of the world is just skipping right over gas and going from coal to solar. So that is really encouraging news there. So I think the answer and how to deal with the problem of the international oil majors is really a competition, and the fact that renewables are just becoming the cheapest form of energy, and in many cases already are.
I also just want to note really quickly, building off of both of those points, is that I think that it's really important to not just make polluters pay for the immensity of the damage and the harm that they cause, but also to stop public subsidies for polluting entities, of which is itself billions of dollars every year. That subsidize these entities and boost these private profit margins for these companies that then do extraordinary harm in the US and globally to communities everywhere. Yeah.
And on the subsidies point, I have a great report to share by our friends at Oil Change International, who just did a new report tabulating the annual subsidies to oil and gas from U.S. taxpayers, which is a really remarkable report. And unfortunately, that got worse in the beautiful big ugly bill. There were a bunch of new subsidies added. So we can put that oil change report in the chat.
Yeah, if you have a link, that would be great. And we can also share that around afterwards. We'll share the recording of this event and some resources like that. I hate to say it, we're out of time. This has been really wonderful. Tony Allen, thank you so much for all your hard work and your reporting and your research. I'm a big fan of both your organizations and the stuff you do. Claire, thanks for being here and all your work on Make Polluters Pay and on the Hill. So, and thank you everybody for joining. I'm really grateful for your time this evening. Please, we're going to share this recording out via email. So if you registered, you'll get a recording of it. Share it with your friends, share it with your family, your neighbors, share this report. Share Make Polluters Pay. We need to build networks of people around the country who are caring about this. As Alan said earlier, elections have consequences, and we have one coming up next year and then in a couple of years, and we can undo a lot of this. It's just we got to come together and act together. So hang in there and keep up the good work, y'all. Have a great evening. Peace.